This is an alleged sexual predator who held a missing teen girl captive for months, states away from her home. Police say Maximilian Bondrescu is a registered sex offender and held the girl against her will. They say when he did let her out, he did it to make her work for his snow removal company, forcing her to shovel snow and wear a mask to cover up her identity. What police say cracked the case of this missing girl who is not seen for 4 months. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. This case that we're following out of Colorado is chilling, according to the court documents that we just got. And it's especially chilling if you're a parent and if you're a parent of a teenager. Listen to this. I want you to meet Maximilian Bondrescu. This is his mugshot from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. He is currently in custody in Fort Collins, Colorado. He is already a registered sex offender. We'll dive into his background a little bit more in just a moment. But I want to break down what we know about this case at this point from the court records that we received out of Fort Collins, Colorado. This case actually starts months ago in a different state in December of last year. Police raided the home in Fort Collins where Bondrescu was living. That was in April, and police say they found a 16-year-old girl hiding in a closet in the home. Bondrescu had told officers when they arrived that they wouldn't find a juvenile female in the house, but get this, according to the arrest document, he told them that they may find an adult female. That certainly sounds like a suspicious thing to allegedly say to police when they arrive at your home. According to police, that girl that they found in a closet inside of the home was from Missouri, and she was reported missing 4 months ago. So let's go back to the beginning when this case first started. In December of last year in Boone County, Missouri, which is in the central part of the state near Columbia, Missouri. The girl's dad called police saying that when he got home from work one day, his daughter was gone. He learned that she hadn't been at school that day. He tried to call her cell phone, but those calls went unanswered. Police learned that this girl did not have a history of running away, but they did know that she had a history of communicating with adult men on social media. Police would learn that she allegedly met Maximilian Bondrescu on a dating app called Boo. They met in November 2024, which was a month before she would go missing in the beginning of December that year. Now, this is a dating app. The fine print says you should be 18 years old to be on the app, but again, this girl was under the age of 18. She was 15 at the time. This app describes itself as being for, quote, connecting with compatible and like-minded souls, date, chat, match, make friends, and meet new people by personality. In April, one of the girl's classmates contacted police to say that they did hear from the girl. She hadn't been heard from since December, so this was a big development for a case that to this point appeared to have gone somewhat cold. The student said that the girl told her that she was in a, quote, different state and, quote, it's better out here with a heart emoji. She also stated she was in California. Police say those interactions happened on Instagram, and those interactions, they're really what cracked the case. Even though the girl had said in that message, allegedly, that she was in California, police got the IP address information from that communication and they tracked her to Fort Collins, Colorado. Now, the address that came back showed that living in the home was a registered sex offender by the name of Maximilian Bondrescu. Police say they then found the girl in a closet of the home. And when they did, she was naked, but they said that she was calm and she was willing to communicate with police and tell them about what allegedly happened. The girl, who's now 16 years old, told police that she met Bondrescu online. She knew that he was in his 40s and that they arranged for him to drive from Colorado more than 11 hours to central Missouri to pick her up back in December. She said that Bondrescu wrapped her in a blanket when they got to Colorado and he carried her into the house in Fort Collins. And the reason he did that was he was living in a home with 2 roommates and he didn't want the roommates to allegedly see her, saying that he would be in trouble if they found out that he had a 15-year-old girl with her. Now, she went on to say that Bondrescu allegedly made her dye her hair, wear glasses, even wear a face mask if they ever left the house. But that only happened a handful of times. One time she talked about making a trip to Walmart, but for the most part, she said she stayed inside the room, inside that home for 4 months. I want to pause on the story for a moment to talk about something really important, and that is high blood pressure. Did you know that high blood pressure is the #1 risk factor for mortality, and nearly 1 in 2 adults have it, and many don't realize they have it until it's too late. It is often something that can be a silent killer because it is lurking unnoticed for so long. But we do have some good news. You don't have to rely on big pharma to manage it. 120 Life is a blend of great tasting superfruit juices that's been shown to actually help lower blood pressure. It's trusted by hundreds of doctors and thousands of people who have seen real results. It's trackable too. You can use a simple blood pressure monitor to see the changes yourself. Plus, it's completely risk-free, and if you don't see lower numbers in 2 weeks, you get your money back. In a world where every second counts, don't let high blood pressure be the threat that you never saw coming. Go to 120life.com/onthecase, use promo code OTC, or scan this QR code on your screen to save 15%. Police say that Bondrescu had sex with that young girl multiple times, and they also claimed that he forced her to wear a metal collar with a lock as well as handcuffs. She told police that there were times that she told Bondrescu to stop, and he would allegedly tell her that she liked it and he would keep going. Police also say that Bondrescu would not let the girl go home when she asked. She reportedly asked multiple times, according to the court documents that we read, and he said no because he would tell her that he couldn't afford to let her go home. Also, when you think back to the cell phone calls that her dad says that he made to her in the days after she went missing, and those calls went unanswered, she says that's because Bondrescu broke her phone with a rock when he took her out of Missouri. We did learn one of the ways the girl was allowed to leave the house was when Bondrescu allegedly forced her to work for his snow removal company. It was called Foco Snow Go. Take a look. Here's the logo on Facebook. That page is still public at the time of this recording. Police say the girl was forced to allegedly wear a mask while shoveling to conceal her identity and age, according to police. Now, here's a post from when the girl was allegedly being held by Bondrescu in January. This may have been one of the times that she was forced to shovel snow while being held captive, allegedly, police say, by this man. Now, we know that Bondrescu, he was convicted of communication with a minor for immoral purposes already. When police tried to talk to him after his arrest in this case, they say he denied having sex with the girl, and he claimed that she was only at the house for a few weeks, not the 4 months that police say this happened. They also say, as the questioning went on, he became uncooperative and he had to be restrained. Bondrescu is facing these charges. You can see there are several of them, including kidnapping of a child, sexual assault on a child, second-degree assault, and false imprisonment of a minor in a room, among several other charges. Join us now to talk more about this case is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. It's always great to have you on, even when the cases like this are just, the allegations here are just so disturbing. I want to go back to the beginning, and it was in December that her dad reported her missing. He came home from work. She was gone. She didn't have a history of running away, but it was learned that she had communicated with some adult men in the past online. I guess when you get that phone call, what pieces of evidence do you have? How do you go about starting an investigation like this?
Well, the immediate thing, and thank you for having me, the immediate thing you're going to do is go to their social media and have access to their social media, because that's usually where you find a lot of these kids are living. They're kind of an alternative life, in a sense, their second life. Because, they don't really access they have friends outside, but social media gives them such a larger venue in which to socialize, and you can socialize from behind the screen. So they feel it's safer, but realize, they're dealing with 15-year-old, 16-year-old kids, and the access they have to the internet, and not the access to them having the internet, the access of these adults, these predators, is the problem. Because kids want to socialize, they think this is okay, they have a different mindset than we do, and then they access these sites, and then you have these predators who launch throw out the little fishing line and see what they can grab. And as an investigator, you're going to do that. You're going to talk to the parent, you're going to talk to the father, you're going to talk to family, friends, you're going to look at the social media. What access did she have to leave the house? When was the last time she was seen at the house? These are things you're gonna fall into play. And the detectives did a good job, because if you can access all their social media and they find out that she goes dark, that tells you something. That tells you a lot of possible dangerous things, that she's been kidnapped, and it seems to be what they're forwarding on this part, or that she might be even worse. And luckily, she was not. She wasn't found dead, and that's the thing that you're glad about.
Yeah, no, and in some instances, it's a happy ending, because she was rescued from the home, But certainly there's a lot to be said about the potential trauma that happened over the past 4 months. I found it interesting on the app, and I hadn't heard of this app before, but I think whenever these stories come up, it's like there's another app that I'm 37, and it seems like now there's just more apps that it's hard to keep up with than like just Facebook and Instagram, which I had when I was younger. But this one, Boo, and we were talking before that like you're supposed to be 18 if you're on this app, and that's kind of standard for a lot of the social media apps that are out there. But it just doesn't seem like it's particularly difficult if you're 15 or 16 years old to get on an app that is meant to be a dating app to meet people who are older, like apparently the case was here.
Yeah, the thing about these apps is you could say, are you sure you're that age? And they'll say no, and they could figure it out. These kids they're not dumb in the sense that they don't know how to access these things. They're socially not ready for this, and I think that's the problem. Even adults get scammed into these type of apps and stuff and get fished in. These are professional predators, and that's the thing you have to think of. These are predators who do this. This is not an individual who a happenstance. I mean, he actually lured her out of her. He lured her to the fact that he gets her out of the house. He covers her up. He travels 700 miles in a rented auto to get her. This girl probably never thought anything like that. She probably didn't, she thought she knew he was older, I think, because given 15, 16 years old, these apps are for 18 and older. So she knows she's talking to somebody older, but she also doesn't know the fact that what's behind the screen and the mental state that this person is. He's not looking there to be friends. He's looking there to do some dangerous things. And these kids don't think that's going to happen to them. And that's what, that's one of the things of youth. You always think, it's not going to happen to me, but it does. And in this case, it did. She got grabbed. I mean, crazy.
Well, we were talking, I think, a couple of weeks ago about a case that was out of Wisconsin with a girl who was a teenager. She was getting pregnant with a guy who was I believe he was in his 40s. Similar situation here in some ways because the victim is someone in their initial conversations with police. It's almost as if they don't realize what they were doing was wrong. And it's not a kidnapping like maybe in a movie you see someone get dragged out of the house, put in a car and driven off. But it's almost that they were cooperative with it. But it's so important to note that at the age of 15, like what you were saying, is people just they're not old enough to understand what's going on. And I just imagine how difficult that is for police to try and stop these cases from happening when you have kids that may think that they're more mature than they actually are, when in reality, what's going on here is something very serious.
Yeah, that's the thing. Unfortunately, law enforcement comes in after the fact. And this has been, this guy groomed her in a sense to be able to leave her house and feel okay with that. And then when you take her there and she wants to go home, he just lies to her. And then he puts her to work. And you're sitting there, how could this possibly happen? She's 16 years old. She doesn't know anything. She was taken to another state. She just knew that. And the fortunate thing was her friends, when she accessed the Instagram app, her friends, said she's in another state. And then they alerted the authorities. And that's where the building of this case came into. Because right now, I mean, she's a kidnapping victim. And the reality is she's there for months and no one knows she's there. I mean, the guy's living with people and he knowingly did this. He blocked her from getting access to anyone in the house. He had a sound device that kept their conversations quiet, so like a white noise device. Mm-hmm. So this guy was just intending to keep her there as long as he possibly could. And when you look at it this way, she wasn't impregnated, which is okay, that's great, but he's a predator. He's a monster, and alleged monster. But realize he has this. He's a registered convicted sex offender, and he has access to the internet, access to leave the state, access to do all of this. He has a business, which is fine. You have a business, but this is something you have to be aware of. And I think education is a key for these kids. We really have to start looking at how to make kids more socially aware, socially adept at handling social media apps such as Boo or Instagram or TikTok or whatever it's going to be, because they just grab into it and they personalize and they make it like their life. And she knew what she was doing to a point, but she's also 15, 16 years old when this happened.
Yeah, and she speaking about the suspect being already a convicted, registered sex offender, how much does oversight vary from state to state in terms of if he had her at the house and she's hiding in a closet, I mean, is in some states a parole officer of some type coming to the home to make sure that something like this isn't happening? I mean, that clearly wasn't happening in this case, but I mean, how much do the rules change from state to state about how much oversight there is of someone who's already on a list of being a convicted sex offender?
Well, that's the thing. It depends upon certain levels of sex offenders. Each state does it differently. I know the NYPD has a sex offenders monitoring unit. A lot of times they may do a home visit. A lot of times the subject will come into to the station or to the location they need to check into and just check in. So it all depends. Just like probation or parole, sometimes what was there anything that led them to do a hyper monitoring, like they do home visits, like surprise home visits, like parole officers do when people are on parole? I mean, that's the thing it comes down to. And you also think about resource availability. How much resource can they afford to put in to how many registered sex offenders do they have at the state or in that county or in that city, and how many investigators can they allocate and do that job on a regular basis? Because you only have 8 hours a day, 24 hours a day, but investigators have so many cases and so many other things to do. Unfortunately, things may get pushed down the pile. But maybe this will be something to look at now, as far as the state level, and how they want to create. And maybe they don't have enough personnel for that monitoring unit. Maybe there'll be a way to allocate the resources and get available investigators to do that. Because this is something. You're going to see this, unfortunately, time and time again. And the only time, with the success stories are that these girls are coming back alive. What we're going to have is eventually a not a success story. We're going to have this girl dead and maybe others. And that's the thing you're worried about, because these are predators and they're serial. They're serial individuals. They are serial rapists, serial pedophiles. They will continue to do what they do until they're stopped one way or another. Incarceration, whatever it's going to take.
Because I wonder how there can be a balance, and if there can be a balance, where you have in the criminal justice system, and anybody who's convicted of a crime, you do the time. If there's restrictions on your release, if you're supervised after you're released, and you follow those restrictions, maybe you start a business, do work, and then in these cases of a sex offender, you're convicted of a heinous crime already. You're a registered sex offender, but to your point as well, I mean, law enforcement, many times it has to be reactionary to one of these cases of how do we find a way that there is the oversight? So someone, all of this is alleged, but he's not able to go on a dating site and then somehow find a 15-year-old girl and then go pick her up and bring her to Colorado.
Yeah, this is the balance we have. You're innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, and that's fine. You serve your time. That's understandable too. But this is where the advocates of, they've served their time. They should not be repunished for their crime of sex offending. But, we have seen in the past that these sex offenders, there are many of them who continue to do the crimes that they've been accused of and the crimes they've been convicted of time and time again. So, when it comes to these recidivist sex offenders, to what level can the criminal justice system maintain some sort of monitoring? How hyper monitoring? How many years of monitoring are you going to do? Those are things that are all thought about. But, through the times that I've been an investigator and seen this and seeing all these people, this is something that does not end. There are people who are reformed, but they're few and far between. We just see a lot of these offenders doing it again. Now, you just had two cases similar where girls were lured out of their house to go with this person. They thought he was A, they turns out to be B, and then they're captured. They're kidnapped in a sense. And they don't know any other alternative or thing to get to escape. There's the thing. It's like we have to understand there's victims involved and there's perpetrators. These are victims. It's their first time happening. These perpetrators are doing it time and time again. So what will be the punishment necessitated, or the amount of punishment necessary? And that hyper monitoring is one of those punishments that may have to be continuous. And that's the reality. This is something. This isn't a crime of poverty. This is not a crime of passion. This is a crime of compulsion. And that's what we see all the time. So we have to avoid the compulsion.
And I wonder too, with some of these apps and how, as a sex offender, he's able to have access to the apps. And then it kind of raises to me another, question that goes back to that one for parents of like, how do you stop something like this? But then there's all these apps that continue to come up. What's your advice, having worked some of these cases, to parents about really knowing what their kids are doing, not just on, the home computer, but obviously their phone opens them up to a world where you can have someone like this suspect who allegedly did what he did.
You have nanny apps and things where you could monitor the kids, but the reality is they're going to find ways to scam out of it. We were kids; we all did that. We always found a way to go out after curfew and say and have a friend back us up and say I was with them, and that's not the way it is. But what you're seeing, unfortunately, more and more is these apps are developing faster and faster. The kids need more education on how to handle, understand what these social apps are for, understand that the pitfalls and the dangers of using these apps. And I don't think they and parents can't do it all the time. Parents have to work. He went to work expecting his kid to go to school, and the kid never
Right.
went to school, and his daughter didn't go to school, so he had to now had to go go all out to find out where his daughter is. She's never done this before. It's not always the parent. It's sort of we have to combine and actually develop an educational format, educational platform for schools to teach kids about social media and what to put out there, what not to put out there, because the internet never forgets. That's the one thing I found out. The internet never forgets. They always remember the mistakes and the bad things and how to avoid having those bad things put out, photos and the like. So you have to sort of educate and inform these kids on those nuances.
And what's as people will they'll talk to this girl, and apparently from what I read in some of the court documents already, that she was somewhat aware that what she was doing was wrong and she was being held against her will, but it wasn't necessarily as clear cut as you might see in a movie. I mean, what are the conversations like with these victims that are young, that may not realize that they've been kidnapped and that they are being held against their will and that they're a victim of a crime, not just someone who might be in an uncomfortable situation? I mean, how do you even approach that conversation with someone so young?
Well, there's the thing. There's the rub is that when you're kids, you feel invincible. You feel like nothing's going to ever happen to you, but it does. I mean, we see this because we've experienced it in our lives, and we try to pass that down and pay it forward in a sense to get these kids to think about that way. But kids don't think in terms of 5 years from now. They think about the here and now. They don't think about the later, and they don't think about a lot of times the consequences of their actions. We've seen it with juvenile offenders. We see that with juveniles who get themselves in situations such as this. You just try to keep them, they want to be adults, but they're not going to be, and they're not adults. That's what you have to do. You have to talk to them kind of as children. This is what it is. How do you sit down to your kid and tell them, you tell a child, don't do this. What's more often going to happen? They're going to do it because they can. But if you show them the pitfalls, somehow, and that's why I think when it comes to teaching this and putting this in maybe an educational format for these kids, when they go to school and they could see the bad things that come with this. I mean, the internet is not bad. It's not evil. It's what people do with it, like anything else. So you have to sort of bring that to the forefront for these kids, get them more engaged and more understanding of this and that, the situations than they have been. And it's new for them for a lot of these kids. They were socially isolated for so long. Now you're putting them out there, and the internet gives you so many broad ideas and broad interests. And then, unfortunately, the predators are out there, and that's where you have to really look at is how to keep the predators off the internet and how do you keep the predators away from these kids.
He's facing several charges in Colorado where he was arrested, but he took someone out of another state, a young girl out of another state, allegedly, and then they had communications online as well. Could he face federal charges because we're going across state lines and it involves the internet?
It would not be a bad idea because with federal laws and they're dealing with like the Mann Act, because that's what is a good idea. Again, looking back at the Mann Act, even though it's an old act, the reality is you transport this kid, and if this determined that he's had sex with this juvenile, there you go. Because I mean that's why he drove 700 miles in a rented car, 700 miles to do this. So there's intent right there, and that's the thing you want to look at. The intent is there. As a detective, you take all of the information you have and all of the data and all of the interviews you have, and you pinpoint, you find all this from the internet and the conversations. You give it to the prosecutor and say, "Have at it." And it's not what you think; it's what you can prove. And I think what you're going to see is a lot of proof available to the prosecution. And I think federal would not be a bad idea because you're going to be not as limited as in the state because now it's interstate, 700 miles. Took her to another
Incredible.
state. I mean, she knew she was there. I mean, it boggles the mind that, it continues to go on like this, that predators will go to whatever stretches to get what they want. And they know, because these kids are not mature enough to understand the ramifications of what they do when they put things on the internet, the conversations, the photos, and anything like that.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's shocking that this is not the only story that's like this that we've talked about in just the last couple of months, and unfortunately, it likely won't be the last one because these cases just continue to happen. Retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Stay safe.
Bondrescu did appear in court this week. He is going to be represented by a public defender, and we also learned he'll be back in court on May 29th. For On the Case, presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.